to our first book club. This is Kristen West McGuire of My Secret is Mine newsletter, and this is called the My Secret Strength Book Club for people who find their strength in books and novels. I'm joined by Margaret McGuire, who is also on the team at My Secret is Mine. And we are going to talk today about A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen. And we have a wonderful review that we posted that's from Bev Manti, who will be joining us in the future for this book club. So welcome, Margaret.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, we talked about A Doll's House. And so when Margaret and I were preparing to do this, we decided that we wanted to talk about the Barbie movie because everybody's talking still about the Barbie movie, and it's been almost a year now. So anyway, but Margaret, why don't you explain to them the book, the play? It's a play.
Yeah. So The Doll's House is a 3-act play written by Henrik Ibsen, which covers basically a few days or even only a few weeks in the life of Nora, who is our protagonist. She is the wife of a banker named Torvald. She has three or four children. So that you can tell they've been married for quite some time. In the first act, we meet Nora, and we're introduced to her. She's just finished shopping for Christmas. She's got all these presents, and she meets an old friend of hers named Christine, whom she hasn't seen in years. Her friend Christine has come to ask her, is like, hey, I saw your husband just got this promotion at the bank. I'm out of work. Can you find me a job? Which she's happy to do for her old friend, and then lets her dear friend Christine in on an old secret, saying, I, Nora, took out a loan when my husband was sick about a year ago, in order to save his life. Aren't I such a wonderful wife? So this very excited, just like this pleasant little secret that she holds, and just kind of feeds into this persona where you can kind of tell she's acting in a certain way. She wants to be perceived a certain way by her husband, who obviously adores her and keeps calling her, oh, my little skylark, my little squirrel, aren't you adorable? Aren't you such a doll? So there's your dollhouse illustration there. As we move into the second act, we learn more about this loan that Nora obtained to, save her husband's life. She borrowed the money from a man named Krogstad, who was an employee at the bank where Torvald, her husband, works, and is about to lose his job at the bank because Torvald doesn't like Krogstad. So Krogstad comes to Nora and says, okay, you remember that loan you took out from me? You signed your father's name as your co-signer. Your father was actually dead when you signed. This is fraudulent. And if you don't make sure that I keep my job, I'm going to tell your husband that you took out a fraudulent loan, which Nora, obviously is like, I can't let this happen, because this act of mercy, of heroism, she's built her identity around it, and she's unwilling to let go of that lie, and all the consequences it would entail, between her and her husband, between her and her children. What does dishonesty mean, when a mother is supposed to be raising her children to be honest? And so they get into all of these interesting details. And then as we get into the third act, we see that Christine once knew Krogstad. So Christine goes to him and says, I've always loved you. We're going to face this out together. Don't go persecuting Nora like this, but still tell her husband the truth, because these two have got to be honest with each other. And so the secret does eventually come out. Torvald receives this letter from Krogstad saying, hey, I'm walking away from the bank thing like you want me to, but FYI, you should know this. And so Torvald comes to Nora and confronts her, saying, how could you do this? You're not who I thought you were. I can't trust you to raise the kids anymore. He goes ballistic. And then Nora goes ballistic in her turn, really, and says, we've never had a serious conversation about anything. You don't
Right.
trust me. I feel like I am your doll. You're showing me off. You asked me to go dance for all of our friends at this party because with this special tarantella that only I know how to do. I want to be my own person and I'm going to leave everyone and everything and go figure that out for myself. And that's, the big shocking ending of the play is that Nora follows through and she leaves.
Yeah.
Which in Heinrich Ibsen's day, that was unheard of,
Yeah, that was like
riots
in
in
the
the
early
street.
1900s. People actually rioted in the streets outside the theater. Like it was a big deal. And I think and that's one of the things that Bev Manti said in her review is that, people no longer are shocked when a woman leaves her family willingly. And it's particularly sad, I think, the way that the portrayal of Nora as a little doll to her husband is very clear. He doesn't see her as an actor in her own life. He doesn't see her as a full person. And and she is shallow and she likes to shop and she does things that are objectively not necessarily a good idea, but at the same time you can really sympathize with that. And one of the things that really brought it up in my mind was when I watched the Barbie movie. Ken was kind of having the same reaction as Nora. He's like, I don't want to just be a prop in your life. I care about you. I want to be important to you. And even in the end of the Barbie movie, Ken is not allowed to be a person. Like he's got to go figure out. Or they said you can't define your life around who Barbie is. You need to go define your life around who you are, which I guess is good pop culture um, advice. But we are unavoidably connected to one another. And, especially when you have a romantic relationship with someone, you're unavoidably changed by that person, even if it's for positive or for negative. Or, I just found it to be really. I don't know. I wasn't a huge fan of the Barbie movie. There were several things about it that bothered me, but that was one of them. Is the
We're not,
rejection of Ken as a person,
yeah, because
and
we're
to
not shaped in isolation. It's the you never like you can go like step away into like nature or hermitage or whatever it is to kind of take a breather, but eventually you have to come back to those relationships. And so I think this is true of both the Barbie movie and to a certain extent the very ending of A Doll's House is that they're both buying into that philosophy that says you do your best thinking in isolation. Like, Rene Descartes did his own best thinking in isolation, and came up with this, oh, I am just a vague brain floating in space. And
yeah,
it's just
yeah,
like if Descartes had had someone with him sitting on that stove, I don't know that he'd have come up with something quite so wild. But you
right.
see that theme over and over again, from Ibsen down to today with the Barbie movie, where he's like, you do your best thinking in isolation. It's like,
Yeah.
no, not really.
Well, and who am I outside of all of the people who are a part of my life? That's a really difficult question. I'm not sure that I'm able. And actually, this kind of leads us into the first question that Bev wrote, when she was saying that Nora seems incapable of assessing her own virtues and sins, and she minimizes her strengths and the effects of her shortcomings on other people. And then her question is, what were the direct results of Nora's inability to be honest with herself? And when I read that question, I thought, I think all of us do that. I think all of us kind of are not 100% clear on the incredible virtues that we have been given by God and the depth of those. I think sometimes we question our virtues in a way that's maybe not helpful. But then also our sins and the effect of those sins on other people sometimes are, we kind of, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. It's like we don't really know what an effect. And then when you are confronted with the effect of your sins on others, it's it hurts.
Yeah. And you could see both of those really twining together for Nora is that, like, she committed, monetary fraud for the best possible reasons. Is like, because I love
Yeah,
my husband, because I don't want my children to be fatherless. Like,
right.
this is coming from a sincere and genuine love for the people in her life, acted out in the worst possible way, which is just like how many times a day do you think that happens? And this is why I felt like I related so much more to Nora than I did to anyone in the Barbie movie. It's just like, oh, there but for the grace of God go I. I can see
Sure.
myself making that mistake.
Right. I mean, she kind of went in, she wanted to be an actor and she wanted to have and to be clear, the thing that she paid for was that they went and took a vacation somewhere so that he could get over tuberculosis, I think, or something like
Yeah.
that. So, and it's expensive to go on vacation. So that was why she did that. And, I guess she probably figured that no one would know that her father hadn't signed it. Um, Nobody would notice, but like, so then it's, and I think actually back then women were not allowed to sign for a loan like that. Like, I think it was
Yeah.
illegal for a woman to sign for a loan. So then here she is signing for a loan on her dad's part, and but then she committed two frauds, which one was to sign a loan in the first place to a woman, and second of all to commit fraud in the process. So but by not being honest, and her husband has a loathing for any kind of indebtedness that was just an interesting. I mean, married couples always argue about money.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just to be expected. I don't know, maybe not, maybe there's married couples out there that don't argue about money, but I mean, I think in my marriage it's we've done pretty well, mostly because my husband is really nice about saying, it's okay. I like how you juggle it. It'll be fine, but sometimes he has to say I don't want to do that, or and stop me, and that's okay. I mean, it's good. It's good to have two people's perspective on it. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think by not being honest with one another, I mean, she's not being honest about.
What she's spending on. Like, you see that in the first act of the play,
Right.
where you see that she comes in, it's like, oh, I bought sweets. I wasn't supposed to buy sweets. I
Yeah, he
spent
told her she
money.
couldn't buy the cookies, and she bought them anyway, and sat there nibbling them when he wasn't looking. And
Yeah.
it's, I mean, childish. I mean, she definitely comes off very, very childish, and so her dishonesty is almost by omission. Like, she's not. They're not really having any conversations. So yeah, and it like sets it up so that she gets to remain in who she thinks she is in his eyes, and he's not looking for her to change either. Like, it calcifies everything. So anyway, well, so let's go on to the second question. Prayer strengthens us in self-knowledge. Do I give myself credit for my virtues? Do I have relationships that are harmed because I'm procrastinating about real problems? Would it help to take my failings to Jesus in the storm? And I really, I think it is very normal to procrastinate about real problems. If you can, if I mean, are we really going to bring this up? Are we just going to, like, I mean, I think we're almost living in a time where, I mean, I could point to the political situation and say I think everyone in both the Republican and the Democratic Party are procrastinating about real problems.
Yeah. Because
And that would maybe include me too, I don't know, but
no, and I think it's that very human thing where it's just like, this is a real problem. I can't solve it by myself, but I don't want to deal with it because there's so many things that you're going to have to work through. But honestly, though, I think that is true, where you have to just you do have to face it after a while.
Yeah.
And that, and you know, prayer is an indispensable thing in that, where it's just, it's one of the things, I'm sure that it's been said over and over again by all of the, you know, the great saints, that, you know, if you have a problem, you need to bring it, you know, to the foot of the cross and just say,
Hmm.
I don't know what to do with this, I don't want to deal with this, but I mean, you're at
Well,
the
and
foot of
I
the
think it also is not like this play doesn't really bring God into it at all.
exactly.
And neither did Barbie, for that matter. Like, there's really no vision that's a transcendent vision of who am I? And the first answer to that question, who am I, is a child of God, a child who is beloved of God for a committed, Christian. That's the first answer. And so then being that committed Christian who sees themselves as related to something beyond themselves and to have definition there, it's very different than just having this blank slate of, well, I have to figure out who I am. At the end of the Barbie movie, Barbie's like, I'm going to figure out who I am. And Ken, you need to do that too. You need to figure out who you are. And I'm sitting there thinking,
You have no reference point, you don't know what you're doing, which is
you're a
just,
doll. I mean,
yeah, I think that is something so striking, you know, especially because you can say that, I think about, you know, it's like a lot of the modern self-help books, like, you know, anything written post-enlightenment, where there's this idea that you are on your own, you got to figure it out for yourself, instead of, you know, my fundamental identity is in this relationship with God, with, you know,
yeah.
with my creator. It's that C.S. Lewis quote that I love: it would be a bold and silly creature to say to its creator, I'm no beggar, I love you disinterestedly. It's like, you can't do that. You
Right,
are,
right. You don't really love disinterestedly. Yeah. I mean, really the relationship that's being harmed by the dishonesty and also just by procrastinating about the real problems is the relationship between themselves and who God calls them to be, who God is. Like it's almost like they have no self-respect because they don't have any awareness of who they might be.
and they're
Um,
so fixated in these roles that they're acting out. And I, as I read the play, I found myself kind of just like rooting for them to have those facades shattered. And, you know, like, yes, Christine, you're right, they've got to be honest with each other, because this is the only way they're ever going to grow together as a couple.
right.
And then you
How
get to
they
the,
can they fix it? Yeah.
yeah.
Oh
And then you
wow.
get to the third act, and Nora says, no, we're not going to fix this together. We're going to fix this alone. And it feels like a slap in the face.
Right. Well, and just before, so when Krogstad writes his letter to reveal what Nora did, before the final scene, like he drops it in the mailbox and Nora's like, oh no, he's gonna read it, so she goes to this whole very dramatized thing, and so when Torvald confronts her and says, no tragedy heirs, please, but then he blames her dad, not her. Like he's all, this is, your father was just like this is all about your father. Your father taught you nothing. And Dr. Rank, who is one of the people in the play, is kind of a bit part, but she thinks that he's going to leave his fortune to them and that'll solve some problems. And Krogstad, he's playing the blame game, everybody. So Bev's question is a good one, is does society still blame parents for the sins of their children? And should parents take the rap? And I mean, Jesus doesn't really talk about parents and children other than let the children come unto me. Like, I mean, I kind of did a quick look, just to see if Jesus had anything to say at all about whether children should be, if parents should be held accountable for their kids. But there certainly is in the writings of St. Paul that we all are accountable to God for our own actions. And so certainly the teaching of the apostles is that the individual soul and the individual person is accountable to God. And there's even a verse in the book of Ezekiel about the soul who sins shall die. Um, and I take from that that sin has consequences.
Yeah.
So it's not just that God's going to look down from on high and go, zap, I caught you, you sinned, and you're going to die, but that there's consequences to those sins that lead to a death of the soul or a death even of the body. And that, the consequence of, in a way, well, I don't know. I'm talking a lot here. Do you think that parents should be responsible for the sins of their children?
I don't I don't think so, because when you talk about responsibility for sin, it's just who's giving consent to the final act, and that's
Mm,
always the individual person. But I think kind of what that leans into is just that whole messy intersection of like nature versus nurture, like how were you raised, or like my favorite
hmm.
phrase is like, what tools do you have in the toolkit? Some people
Right,
don't have a very well filled toolkit. They don't, when they're confronted with certain situations, they don't know what to do.
right.
And I mean, like, obviously, you could say parents, as the first educators, the primary educators, are, you can say that they are responsible for at least giving a toolbox, but you can only fill that toolbox with the tools that you yourself have.
Right,
And so you have
right.
that thing where it
Very
starts running
humbling.
down, yeah, running down the generations. And I mean, it's just such a messy area of
Hmm.
theology where it's just like, yes, you are ultimately responsible for your own actions and your own choices,
Hmm.
but God is going to understand if you don't necessarily have the context or the tools to make better choices.
Right. Just like the classic example of, definition of what is a mortal sin. It has to be something that is gravely, objectively serious. You have to know that it is gravely a serious sin, and then you have to deliberately commit it, even though you knew that. So it's like the three, like, and really in this case, I kind of wonder whether Nora truly understands the ramifications of what she's doing.
Yeah.
She seems like she's running away from herself, even, or from the person that she's become. And really, Torvald himself, by treating her like a 2D person instead of a 3D person, has his own role to play in pushing her away, where she
Yeah.
feels like he can't see her for who she really might be or might become. And he even kind of, like, even though I borrowing money, that, oh my goodness, women just don't do that, but she was trying to be an actor in her own life. She was trying to make things better for him, and he refuses to even
To acknowledge
consider,
that. Yeah.
yeah, that's not even part of, and so he's rejecting who she wants to be, which is an actor in her own life. And it's just a really, they are everyone has their little role to play. I guess that's why I always feel like, in the church writ large, like, we do have a relationship with each person in the church. And to the extent that our church is suffering and having terrible things happen right now, the fallout from the sexual abuse crisis, all of these very, very terrible sins that are coming to light on the part of our church, and then to discover that as a member of that church, it's not possible, I don't think, to push ourselves out, like, like we
No.
we we bleed when the church bleeds. We're all one body, and it's just really sad. And to embrace that is, only God could help you embrace that, like,
Yeah.
who I am
Because
before
it's,
God. I mean I am bemused. It's like, and I think that, it's like that thing in even the apple, and everybody's like, well, she made me do it. And then it is like, and then the serpent said, and all this, like, well, actually, the apple got eaten.
At the end of the day, yeah, where you're just
Yeah.
because and I think that's true. I think of like every sin, every mistake, where it's just like it was never just you by yourself. There were other people like who had a role in it, and just like again that whole thing where we are never in isolation, and
Right.
especially like in within a marriage or within the church is like we stand together, we bleed together, and if we fall, we're fallen together.
Yeah.
And so
So
just
true.
and you see that brokenness, and that's what contributes so much to the brokenness between Nora and Torvald, is that they're not willing to bleed together or fall together. It's just like
Yeah.
my own reputation and identity is sacrosanct,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
it can't be, not especially not in a marriage where you have the two become one flesh. So this is you signed up for this, you're bleeding
Right.
together.
Well, and he didn't sign up for that. It sounds like he signed up to have a prop.
That's true. Yeah.
I
See,
mean, like that was kind of his view of what his wife would do, is to manage all of the props of his life and keep them all in an orderly fashion, circling around him as the main actor. And that's so sad. I mean, yeah. Oh, this was such a great conversation. I hope people will join us. We're going to do book club every month, and we would invite you. It will always be the second Thursday of the month at noon. And we ask that please consider being a subscriber to My Secret Is Mine. It's at mysecretismine.com. So thank you again so much, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
right. Bye.
Bye.